Mike? What?
I got an option to
We got TV? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the regular December meeting of the Zoning Board of Adjustment. We will follow our usual procedure this evening, which is to say we will take the cases in the order in which they appear in the agenda. We will ask the appellant to step forward, be sworn in, be seated in the chairs to my right, and offer any testimony that they would like us to hear. We do request that if at all possible, they confine that testimony to a 10-minute interval. Following that, we will invite anyone from the floor who wishes to testify in favor of the appeal to step forward, be sworn in, and also speak. And following that, anyone who wishes to be heard in opposition will be offered that opportunity for 5 minutes. Following all of that, we will check in with code enforcement to see if there's any comment from the code enforcement office, and if any information has arisen that seems to bear factual clarification, the appellant will have the opportunity to offer that clarification, not new evidence, prior to our closing the public testimony portion of the hearing. Under most circumstances, the board will act on each case prior to moving on to the next. The first case this evening is a request for an extension. This is case 3.1 MMA Architects on behalf of Walmart Real Estate Business Trust requests, apparently they have friends in high places, requests approval for a 1-year extension of the variance ZBA 0012-2022, approval to allow a total of 5 signs with an overall square footage of 346.77 square feet on the westerly storefront, where only 3 signs with a minimum square footage of 200 square feet are allowed at 344 Loudon Road in the Gateway Performance District. Is anyone here representing Walmart? A thunderous silence.
I don't believe anyone's here.
Okay. What we will do is we will shuffle that to the back of the agenda and proceed with the agenda. If anyone does show up, we will hear from them. If not, we'll take it back up and act on it without any testimony. The next case is case 4.1 under public hearings. Orrin Reno on behalf of NHSCOT, New Hampshire Scott, and Child and Family Services Realty Corporation request approvals for variances from section 2824J, Table of Principal Uses, to allow services, personal and business use, where such use is not otherwise permitted, and section 2824H, multiple principal uses on a single lot, to allow multiple principal uses on the same lot where only one principal use is permitted, at tax map lot 32Z59, addressed as 210 Bog Road in the Open Space Residential District.
And I'll need you all to sign in.
I'm waiting for traffic to stop. You swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Would you identify yourselves for the record as you testify, please?
Sure. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm John Arnold from Orrin Reno, represent the applicant, NH Scott.
I'm Terry Wilkie, Executive Director of NH Scott.
Good evening, I'm Stuart Anderson. I'm with Alba Architects.
And I'm Morgan Dunson, engineer with Novus Group.
Thank you. If you give me 1 second, I just want to pull up the GIS map to get us oriented. All right. So our application tonight involves 210 Bog Road, pulled up on the GIS. It's about 58 acres, zoned open space residential. It was formerly used as Camp Spalding, which some of you may be familiar with. That was a summer camp that operated for about 100 years, 1921 to 2021. About 200 kids aged 8 to 15 operating seasonally there. The camp closed in 2021, and the property's been on the market since that time. The proposal tonight, see if I can find the overview plan here. All right, so here's the property again. We just saw it on the GIS map. Zoom out once more, just to get oriented. Bog Road is along the bottom of the plan right here. River Road is along the left side of the plan up here. And you can see that the property has a pretty odd configuration. It has kind of two main developable pockets of land, this smaller pocket along River Road right here, and then the larger portion of the property off of Bog Road right here, and they're connected by a very narrow passageway between the two of them. You can see on the plan here, this right side of the plan and all along Bog Road right here, this is all wetlands. They're all delineated on there. And the other thing I would just point out is the other lines you see on the plan, those are topographical lines. So you can see that the site has a lot of elevation change to it. It's about 100 feet of gain from the low points to the high points, and it all slopes up towards the middle right here with some pretty steep slopes. There's an existing main lodge building from the camp right in the middle. You can see where the mouse is. And some other smaller facilities, cabins, things like that on both sides, but over here on the River Road side, playground, swimming pool, some older camp buildings as well. Under our proposal that we're going to speak about tonight, NH Scott would purchase the property and make it their headquarters. It would have their offices. It would provide a location for various indoor and outdoor activities that are geared towards their mission of promoting and preserving Scottish culture. And I think to, put that in some context and give it a little bit more meaning, I'll turn things over to Terry to speak to you a little bit about what NH Scott is and what they do.
NH Scott is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We started as a Murray Clan picnic in 1975 at Loon Mountain Resort, and then grew into the New Hampshire Highland Games that we are now. Thank you. Our mission is to share and promote the customs and traditions of Scotland. We connect people through books, music, dance, art, food and drink, language, travel, and much more. Our current offices are at 25 Triangle Park Drive in Concord. We have 3 full-time and 2 part-time staff members. Some work remotely. We have conference rooms at the Triangle Park Drive office that we use for bagpipe lessons, drum lessons, dance lessons. We do band practice there. We have board meetings, and we have an occasional seminar. Usually these are for 20 plus or minus people. NH Scott is best known for the New Hampshire Highland Games, which is one of the largest games in the world. It creates a $10 million economic boost for the state of New Hampshire. We welcomed 37,000 people over 3 days at Loon Mountain Resort in Lincoln. We're not proposing anything like that for this property. We currently produce 2 medium-sized events, Hogmanay and Beltane, where we have about 300 to 400 people. Purchase of the camp would allow us to expand to 4 to 6 outdoor events, and we could potentially grow attendance up to 600 people. These events are held at various locations throughout the state, as they cannot happen at Triangle Park Drive. The purchase of 210 Bog Road would allow us to consolidate all of our operations and activities except the Highland Games, which would remain at Loon Mountain. We would like to renovate the main lodge to use for our administration offices, as well as for gathering spaces for indoor activities like kilt making, genealogy classes, or bagpipe lessons. We would like to have a small retail space to sell New Hampshire tartan products like caps, ties, and scarves during our events, as well as through online and telephone orders. The 4 to 6 events will primarily take place outdoors with food service and some smaller activities like the card game Strummock played within the main lodge. We've met with budding neighbors a few times and have kept them apprised of the various inspections and studies that we've conducted over the past 2 years. Several neighbors are here tonight. NH Scott is about to celebrate its 50th birthday as an organization. We have a strong track record of doing good work, being community-minded, and as an economic driver for the state of New Hampshire. Excuse me. We want to be good neighbors and believe that we have the support of many in the neighborhood. We are committed to addressing any neighborhood concerns and will deal with any issues that may arise. Neighbors already have my cell number and know that they can reach out at any time. Thank you very much for your consideration.
So, turning back to the plan, zoom in a little bit here. There aren't any new buildings proposed currently. The proposal would be to renovate the existing main lodge building, which you can see right here. That was the main lodge building for the camp. It'd be interior renovations to create office space and indoor activity space for New Hampshire Scott. The office staff currently consists of 3 full-time employees, 2 to 3 part-time employees, and the indoor activities would be things like what Terry mentioned, mainly things like book clubs, dance classes, kilt making, music lessons, and the like. Group sizes for those activities are typically in the range of 20 people, more or less. Sometimes there'd be smaller activities, sometimes there'd be larger gatherings in the inside space. Oops, wrong way. So this is the floor plan for the main lodge. This upper rectangle here is the main level, the upper level, and the lower rectangle here is the lower level of the building. And so you can see on this, we should zoom in a little bit further, I guess looking at the upper level first, existing kitchen here on the right side of the building, that would remain, that would be used by the office staff, and as Terry mentioned, for food prep during events that would occur. Gathering space here in the middle of the building for classes, events, seminars, things like that. Existing bathrooms on the left side. This area labeled New Hampshire Tartan would be the retail area that was mentioned, a small gift shop offering, clothing, things like that during events or for, phone or internet orders. And then on the lower event here, the lower floor here, the actual office space you can see right across the top. Existing bathrooms on either side, and then some storage space and classroom area in the middle. So the city, we met a number of times with city staff, and we kind of went back and forth and grappled with how this use should be classified under the Concord Zoning Ordinance, because it's fairly unusual and involves kind of a bunch of different aspects. And the city has classified the use into 2 principal uses. The principal indoor use is NH Scott's corporate offices, and so that's classified as personal and business services. The city determined that the ancillary activities I mentioned, the lessons, the gatherings, functions, all that indoor stuff is all accessory to the corporate offices. So the indoor use classification is the corporate offices is personal and business services. And that use is not allowed in the RO district, so that's our first variance request tonight, is to ask for a variance to allow the corporate office use in the RO district. The second principal use the city has classified this into is outdoor recreation, things like the athletic training, the larger periodic gatherings that would be primarily outdoors. And that classification is a privately owned outdoor recreational facility. That's allowed by conditional use permit in the RO district. So our intent is to go to the planning board if we get approval tonight and ask for a conditional use permit for that component of the use. We're not asking this board for any relief related to the outdoor component. But we are asking for a second variance, which is to allow 2 principal uses on the same lot, and that presumes that if the planning board were to grant the conditional use permit for the outdoor recreation, that we would have a variance in place to do that on the same lot as the corporate offices. And I guess at the risk of being redundant, but just to clarify our ask, because there are a couple of moving pieces, the The variance asked tonight is for the indoor uses. It's for what's been classified as corporate offices, and to allow two principal uses on the same lot. The outdoor uses, the larger gatherings, the 600-person events that you heard about, those are all part of what would be a conditional use permit application to the planning board and are not part of the relief that we're asking for from you guys tonight. We're certainly happy to talk about what that would look like if you have questions, get into detail on it, but I just wanted to clarify the two different use classifications and how they need to be approved. So with that said, I can pause for a moment if you have questions about that. Otherwise, I can jump into the variance criteria and kind of field questions as they come up.
I do have a question for code enforcement. Why would the office use not be considered accessory to the outdoor uses?
The building is a separate building, and in our review, I'm sorry, do you want me to answer that?
Whoever. It doesn't matter.
The building is a separate use, it's a standalone building. The accessory use needed a principal function, and we really felt that their business corporate use was the principal function of their New Hampshire Scott in the property.
Because the rest of it didn't involve a building.
Right, it's two separate uses completely.
Thank you.
And I would just add that the office use, the building will be used pretty much year-round.
Right.
The outdoor events are only 4 to 6 outdoor events in certain,
4 to 6 during the course of the year.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well, so they're gonna be using the offices every week, all year long. Yeah.
Andrew?
Just a question about what you were talking about, that you don't need a variance for the events. Is that because it's a residential open district, is that a variance not required for events as long as there's a conditional use permit, or is that based on the fact that you had prior variances for the camp?
It's based on the fact that the events that they're having are outdoors, so they fall under the outdoor recreation classification, and that requires a conditional use permit rather than a variance
Okay.
under the zoning ordinance.
So,
It's just-
so any district can apply for those conditional use permits in,
No, outdoor recreation is only allowed in certain districts.
I see.
um,
But this is
but
one of those
this
districts.
one allows it with conditional use.
Okay.
Not all districts allow it.
So they would need to apply for that every single time? Or they can
No.
apply for it once and outline how often they're gonna do it, and it would be
Correct.
approved, and then they have that thereafter?
Yes,
Okay.
it's a use. So it's a use. They're using the site as an outdoor recreation area.
On an ongoing
Facility,
basis? Okay,
yeah.
thank
So
you.
this feels very reminiscent to the Audubon Society and the conservation place off of Portsmouth Street. This seems like almost the same thing. There's conference spaces, there's office spaces, and then they have outdoor things as well.
It is, the difference is the Audubon is, it has some environmental aspects to it, and so it falls under a different use.
Gotcha, okay.
Did anyone else have questions?
Water and sewer, is it city or septic and wells?
I believe it's septic and wells.
And you're not asking for, I don't see you're asking for any relief from parking, so I suspect there's plenty of parking there for the,
We believe so. I think we're going to need some alternative parking arrangements from the planning board as part of this.
but not for tonight.
Not for tonight. We're not asking anything for that.
How many spots are required for what you're developing?
The parking requirement,
Yeah.
believe?
Yeah, so I calculated based off of assembly square footage of the building. Let's see. 1 space per 40 square feet, which makes the required spaces 288. We provide 289. 22 paved parking up at the top, 178 gravel spaces, and then an 89 grass overflow area. So we'll have to get additional relief for alternative parking spaces with the
Again, not
planning.
tonight.
Yeah.
But it would all be on site, on that site?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, all right there.
Please proceed.
Thank you. So I guess jumping into the criteria, talk about the public interest and the spirit of the ordinance together. As you know, it's, the analysis is whether the variances would alter the essential character of the locality or threaten public safety, health, or welfare. In terms of the locality, I don't believe there's going to be really any change, physically speaking. The existing buildings are going to be used. There's no construction that's being proposed. The office, in terms of use itself, the office use is relatively minor. As I mentioned, it's 2 to 3 full-time employees, 2 to 3 part-time employees. The activities and events that are indoors, those have all been classified as accessory to that office use. So I think the analysis is really just about the office use in and of itself. Camp Spalding, as I mentioned, operated here for 100 years, and the main lodge building during that time had office space in it, and camp staff was somewhere around 35. Now, admittedly, that only operated a few months a year, and I understand that, but in terms of comparisons, having an office staff of, anywhere from 3 to 6 employees on site on a daily basis, I think is relatively minor even compared to that seasonal use. The other thing to note is taking a look at the plan here. I'm going to zoom back out to show this, but the main lodge building where we're talking about putting the office is really very centrally located on the property. So the distance, there's some residential properties off here on the left side, and the distance from the main lodge to these property lines is about 450 feet, and it's about 650 feet between the main lodge and the closest actual residential building on these lots. And this area between, the driveway down to the edge of the property line is all pretty heavily wooded. So the office use, I think, will have very little impact on the public. On substantial justice, so this is the balancing test, whether the variances would cause more harm to the public than benefit to the applicant. And here, we don't think there's really any harm to the public here. New Hampshire Scott is a charitable organization. Its proposed office use puts the building back to a use. It's been sitting vacant for the past 4 years since it's been on the market, and the condition of it has been deteriorating. And all the uses at issue in this application, again, are the indoor uses, and the indoor uses are very well buffered from the surrounding properties. The benefit of the variances to the applicant are that obviously they're necessary for New Hampshire Scott to relocate here. It's a use variance, so without the variances, they can't use the property, and it would go back on the market and continue to sit on the market until someone else comes along with a better idea of what to do with it. On the property values, allowing NH Scott's use wouldn't diminish surrounding property values. We submitted a professional opinion from Brian Underwood. It's in your materials. Who's a licensed appraiser opining to that effect. And again, the theme here is that we're proposing essentially a 3 to 6 person office within an existing building on a 58-acre tract of land that's well buffered from the surrounding properties. And on the hardship, if you take a look, I'll zoom back out again just to highlight a couple of these. There's, it's pretty easy to see how this property is unique. As I mentioned before, it's segregated into kind of 2 separate buildable areas. The smaller area up here on River Road and the larger area down here on Bog Road, connected by this very kind of narrow passageway. It also has down here on the left kind of this long, narrow corridor that juts out of the side, and this kind of triangular area jutting off the top corner as well. And to the point, this is a large property at roughly 58 acres, but the configuration of the property really leaves a much smaller area that is buildable and usable based on that configuration. And the other thing is that with the wetlands you can see all down the right side of the property here and along the bottom side of the property, it further reduces the usable land. And then lastly, the topographical lines that I pointed out before show that there's a lot of steep slope on this property. And all of those factors and characteristics of this property basically show that you've got a large lot that's very difficult and challenging to develop for a lot of uses. And it's really, it's not just a theoretical argument. I mean, this has proved itself out over the last 4 years that the property's been on the market. And over that period of time, there's been at least 2 real estate developers who have come and explored the property. There was one that came and put the property under contract in March of 2022. They proposed doing like a corporate retreat and wedding venue on the property, and they put the property under contract, did some due diligence, and then ultimately backed out a few months later after they got, I think, some negative feedback from city staff on the proposal and getting a better understanding of what the permitting hurdles would be to do that. I'd note that that use wouldn't be a permitted use of this property either. So they backed out of the deal. And then there was a second developer that came along just a little bit after that in the summer of 2022 and explored a residential development. Residential single-family development or condominiums would be a permitted use here, but that developer spent a number of months doing a feasibility analysis and then determined that because of the site constraints, the slopes, the wetlands, the zoning restrictions, that they weren't going to be able to get enough residential units on this property to make a development viable. So they backed out as well. So the general public purpose of the restriction on prohibiting offices in the rural open space residential district is to keep more intensive uses out of more rural areas. But the corporate offices that we're talking about here really aren't a very intensive use. As I said, given the number of employees we're talking about, small handful, it's not particularly intensive, and we can repurpose the existing main lodge building to maintain a lot of separation and buffering between that use and between the adjacent neighbors. And the site constraints that I mentioned, the wetlands, the topography, the odd configuration, they all make it very challenging to develop this property for other permitted uses. And given all of this, we don't believe there's any substantial relationship between the general public purpose specific application to this property to prevent offices. And the final point I guess I'd like to make is that, as I've said, NH Scott's use is very unique. It was a challenge to come up with a use classification or use classifications for it. And the reality is that it needs a lot of outdoor space for the outdoor activities, for the athletic events, for the gatherings, and so on. And it also needs the indoor space for the offices and for the indoor gatherings. And the 2 use classifications determined by the city are only allowed in 3 of the 18 zoning districts throughout the city. And those are the urban commercial, the central business performance, and the opportunity corridor performance districts. And that dramatically limits where this use could go by right, essentially to like downtown areas. And even within those 3 districts, there are very few, if any, lots that are big enough to accommodate the type of events and the type of activities that they contemplate doing as an organization. And I'd argue that a location like 210 Bog Road is a much more suitable location for a use like this than a downtown area or a prime commercial area. And if you're going to allow this use anywhere in the city, I think this is a prime location for it. And I do think that this is something that should be allowed in the city. I think New Hampshire Scott is an incredibly valuable asset to the city in that they offer, all sorts of cultural activities, education, events, things that really enrich the community that aren't available elsewhere. So I think that is what I had on the variance criteria, but we're happy to field questions if you have them.
Questions from the board? Yes.
I have a question. And this seems like a good creative use of it by NH Scott, but economically, it's a really big parcel for what they're just doing 4 to 6 events in office space, and I'm wondering if at some point they'll kind of want to use more events or maybe even rent it out, or are they pretty firm that they're on the number of events that they're planning on doing, and that's not really going to change, just to make maximum use of the site?
I'll let Terry speak to that more, but I would just clarify up front that the 4 to 6 events that we're talking about are outdoor events. The indoor events would be more frequent, and there'd be ongoing lessons, activities, and so on within the building.
Right, right, I understand that. The 4 to 6, I guess, I forgot how you called them, but the larger scale events with I think you said up to 600 attendees?
I can't, excuse me, I can't see us expanding beyond that, mainly because we are a small staff and the Highland Games take a huge amount of our time to plan. I mean, it's more than a year-round planning process.
Sure.
We bring in, I mean, this coming year for our 50th birthday, we're talking about chartering a plane to come from Scotland to bring over 80 people. I mean, the hotels are full from Littleton to Plymouth, and the restaurants are full. It's a huge event. We're a very small staff, and we use a lot of volunteer time as well. So I just don't see how we could expand to have more than 4 to 6 of those sort of medium, I don't want to call them large because the games, that's truly large.
Right.
So these are fairly large for events, but not that large. So I just don't see that as a staff we could manage to plan the games, organize the games, and do that well as more than 4 to 6 of these other events during the year.
Well, you don't plan to rent out the facility for other
We
events?
do not
or
plan to
anything like
rent
that?
out the facility, no.
But just to push back a little bit, I mean, I understand with your current staff, but obviously you've had very impressive growth, which has been, great for the state and the community. So, if you continue to see the demand, I mean, wouldn't you want to hire more staff and continue to grow?
I don't know. How would you answer that, Stuart?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to note the 4 to 6 events that are noted already have built-in expansion. I mean, right now, Terry alluded to earlier, there's only actually 2 additional events throughout the year. So by suggesting 4 to 6, we've already built in some room for expansion of the year. So there's an additional 4 events that don't even exist today, which would take increased manpower, office staff. So I think we try to be cognizant that some growth is inevitable, yes, but I think there is a kind of plateau to that the organization can sustain, and that would be the 4 to 6 events.
Thank you.
Stuart is also, I want to add, he's not just Alba Architects, which is our architect, he's my immediate past president as well, so.
Thank you.
He knows the organization well.
Just had some questions on the indoor events. You talked about some classes and music and dancing and things like that. How frequently will that activity take place there?
Well, we currently have about 48 weeks of both bagpipe lessons, pipe lessons, and dance lessons. Bagpipe, drum, and dance lessons. Those are happening about 48 weeks a year right now. And I would think those would continue in that same manner. Again, about 20 people for all of those activities per week. We would have sporadic. We've had Gaelic lessons before where you have 20 people come and it's maybe a 6-week session, that kind of thing. Same with kilt making. That would be maybe 5 days in a row where you have people coming in to make a kilt. It's 8 yards of fabric. You need a lot of room to make them and about 5 days. So those are all things that we look forward to being able to add to our programming. But it's not a huge amount of time that we're looking at. It's probably not every single day kind of thing. But the lessons would be. We would like to add harp lessons. We would like to add fiddle lessons. Those are things that we haven't previously been able to offer.
Haggis cooking classes?
Spade casting is something we've talked about as well because there's a pond on property, so that's a special fly fishing method done in Scotland, and then we could take them on the river to actually to try their true hand at it.
So I have a question, Golden Force. It's not meant to be provocative at all, but so are they asking for an office building that has classroom activity in it, or is it a classroom activity building that has a little bit of office space in it? And would that matter from what their request is?
So we classify as an office use with ancillary training, or accessory training, sorry, I'm calling it ancillary.
Right.
Accessory use was the training elements that we included under the office business use.
And if they were not doing any office activity there, they were just going to use this for classroom instruction and things like that, would it be the same request before us this evening?
I think it'd be very similar. I actually did a lot of research, and read your minutes from many years ago with New Hampshire Unitil had a training facility built out on Silk Farm Road. And some of the minutes I read there was concern, was it really truly educational? And did it need to be considered a secondary educational, which is one of the things we discussed as a use here. And because there's no degrees, there's no professional certifications per se involved, we stood away from that. You actually had concerns that you voiced regarding the Unitil training that was probably I won't say a high stretch, but it was never even dealt with at that meeting. So that helped me focus on what I thought here was just accessory was the training, the classrooms, music stores do music lessons, art stores do art lessons. They have a business, New Hampshire Scott, they're going to do their training and all lessons.
Okay, thanks.
Any questions? Mr. Arnold, you all set?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I've never had the courage to ask.
Just saying here that. Going in clean.
Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Would you please have a seat and give us your name for the record?
Sure. My name is David Murray. I am an abutter to the north side of Camp Spalding. I run Murray Farm Greenhouse and have for my whole life. I came home from Concord Hospital to this location on the road and have been there ever since. We can lay claim to being there longer than Camp Spalding because my family has been there. This is our 120th year at this location. And I'm in the house that my great-grandparents bought 120 years ago. So I guess we do have some roots there. I went to Camp Spalding as a kid. At the conclusion of camp, when I was 6 years old prior to being a camper, the director of Child and Family Services came down with a 9-year-old boy who had nowhere to sleep that night. And that night he was in bed with me. And to this day, he is my brother. So he didn't have family, and he went from being somebody who nobody would take to becoming a tribe of 25 between my siblings and my cousins. And so he's been a part of the family ever since. So camp has a lot of significance to me, both as an abutter and hearing the bell ring at lunchtime and at time for games in the evening and this sort of thing. I'm here. I caught most of the first meeting from NH Scott, and I missed the second meeting because I had traveled and I was still quarantining from COVID. So I missed the second meeting. So there could be an awful lot of things that I'm missing. So I hope that you take that into consideration, that I could have missed something that was maybe thrown on the table that at one of the meetings that I perhaps missed. I guess what I really want to try to impress was already said tonight, in that the location has some uniqueness, both in wetland, topography, general layout, location, lack of city municipal services, including city water and city sewer. And I look at the overall impact to the land as very minimal from New Hampshire Scott. I look at it as a way better use than perhaps some of the alternatives could be, though I don't know what all the alternatives could be. I do know for a fact that it's been vacant for some time. In the year 2019, we suffered a horrific fire at our farm, and though it's not been proven, the insurance investigator agreed with me quite wholeheartedly that more than likely our fire was arson. And that arsonist gained access to our property through the Camp Spalding property. And we also have had a couple break-ins a few years ago, and that also was likely through Camp Spalding property. So vacant property is a haven for people that probably shouldn't be there. And going back to, geez, it would be in the early 1950s, my sister and brother they were young children, had a run of the farm, and were talking about the funny lady, that they had to get back from lunch to go see the funny lady, and my mother thought they had an imaginary friend. And it turned out this was a state hospital patient that had left grounds. She'd gone to Camp Spalding as a kid and gone back there, and was having a time with my sister and this little girl. So an empty facility is probably not a great facility. And in terms of the impact on the neighborhood, we can all wish for the good old days of when the bell rang and kids played, you could hear the laughter and all that sort of stuff. But those days have passed by at this point. And as we look ahead to where we are now, I just want to go on the record as seeing this as probably one of the lightest impacts to our neighborhood and to my life as a business operator and as a person who's lived on the street forever. And I know that the variance, you know, there's a lot of angles to the variance, but I certainly hope the board uses good judgment in realizing the uniqueness of this very situation, because hands down, it might be one of the most complex variances that you've got to look at in a while, because of the uniqueness of the situation as well as the uniqueness of the particular people who want to occupy this property.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
I have a
Sure.
question. So a few years ago, the city did a major rebuild of Bog Road. How's it holding up?
Well, at the minute, it's good.
Okay.
In a certain
Because it used to be a
counts-
mess every other year, right?
What's that?
It used to be a mess every other year.
Oh, God, yeah, it's 100 times better. And one thing I did say to the assistant city manager at the conclusion of Bog Road repair, it took me 4 years to get $35,000 to build a bridge, and it took me about 15 minutes to get $1.3 million to fix Bog Road. So I guess it all depends upon what the application might be. But-
So it could handle traffic, I guess. is
Yeah,
what-
yeah. And it's, but it's, and you know what's interesting is Bog Road, it's a great road now, again. And obviously, the city has done a lot of resurfacing all over, and it's very appreciated, for sure.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Murray.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who would like to be heard in opposition to this appeal? Please come forward. There or over here, wherever you're comfortable.
Close is good.
Swear to tell the truth.
I do.
May we have your name, please?
Edward W. Smith.
What would you like us to know, Mr. Smith?
First of all, I'd like to tell you, I'm 81 years old, and this is my bedtime. So,
I understand.
so
You're not the only one in the room who feels that way, I suspect.
I should be having my cocoa right now. So you don't know the sacrifices this is going through here. The thing of it is I love the city of Concord. I've been here 10 years, and I've been all over the United States. And this is a city that works. It really does. And the reason it works is because you have put together this incredible plan, and you enforce it. You have people doing the codes, and you're doing this and that. And it's a plan that's watched and monitored, and the results show every day. You go up and down Main Street or up Loudon Road. And I think that process has to be looked at here. And that's the reason I'm here, to say, let's cut away from the sturm and the drum and the rah-rah-rahing, and let's look at how it impacts our plans, our codes, and things like that. So if you don't mind me reading from, the way I sent in a 4-page opinion piece about
seen it.
this. And so if you don't mind, I'd like to read from that and offer comments aside from it, because quite frankly, I can't think that straight. That's the reason I have to follow what I said before. So I'm against granting the variance as it's been presented tonight. I respect what the Scotts are doing. I think they're fine people. I really do. I would say it's the kind of thing you could really do anywhere. It doesn't have to be in Concord. They made a great presentation saying it has to be in Concord. Honestly, you could go 20 miles from here, cut the price of the property in half, and have no zoning. It doesn't have to be here. I would start with that. So there's 5 steps, 5 approval parts that you need in order to pass this variance. And every one of those has to be approved, if I understand the process correctly. And so I would like to go on record and say the first part of it is that the variance is contrary to the public interest. It really is. It works against the individuals affected by it, the abutters like myself, and it goes against the city as itself. The city is in crisis. The city has housing. You have people living on bridges, under bridges, that are legitimate people, but they've fallen down the path. If we can open up one more spot and move somebody up, don't you think that's really something to do? And say, to look at this and say, well, you know, it's one house. What difference does it make? Well, if you're that person that just moved up a notch, don't you think that's a big deal? I do. I'd like to be that person that moved up a notch. Let's have a little heart for the rest of the people that are out there living in this city. They're good people. They want to, don't deserve to be treated like this. So, okay, I'm going to go on. Granting the variance would go against the interest of the city and the abutters. The zoning ordinance for the RO district is designed to maintain a predominantly residential character and permit only specific low-impact uses, introducing services, if you will, personal and business, even if minor, sets a precedent and undermines the district purpose by allowing commercial encroachment. We'll say, well, it's just a little thing. But, it's who's to stop? Well, this is the first one. It's not. But who's to stop somebody coming and say, well, hey, you let them in. What about this guy? I'm a commercial thing. How is it different? There's nothing in the zoning that says, okay, it's a little business. Who cares? That isn't in the rules. It doesn't say, well, it's just a little thing here. It has to do. Size doesn't matter. It's a principle behind it. And if we open the door for this right there, who's to stop somebody else from coming in and say, hey, it's the same thing? So right there is a danger to the city that we love so much. It's a risk. The claim that the office is minor and is only 5 people or whatever, it's irrelevant that the fact it's a business. There's nothing in this, it says, well, it's a business, so it's only 5 people, it's okay. The law, the code, all the ordinances don't go into how many it is. It just says commercial. That's as simple as it goes, and that's exactly what this is. I'm sorry, I'm nervous, I don't speak well. Besides, like I said, I'm tired. So if I could go on. Comparing the office space to a staff function historically with Camp Spalding, and then moving into an entire different character of a thing. We had little kids running around. This is not just little kids running around. They're selling this and they're selling that. They're doing all kinds of different stuff in there. This is not somebody running around toasting marshmallows. This is a big deal. Totally different character of what we've got there. So one of the things that's been bandied about, and I happen to support, is one of the possible uses is single-family homes. What does the city need more than anything else is a single-family house or multiple housing or whatever. The city is in crisis. It needs housing. We're taking that opportunity away if we put this in there. There can never be another house built there. It's over. So why take the risk? Why take that off the table? Well, maybe it's not single out. One of the things that's come through through everybody that's spoken so far is we really don't know what the space could be used for. Housing, possibly, yeah. Maybe, a McMansion. Who said? But we don't know. There's been other people have looked at it. But right now, for the last 2 years, the Waypoint, that's the seller, has been totally locked up with the New Hampshire Scots. And so you can't say, well, nothing's happened in the last 2 years. Well, the last 2 years it's been under contract. So there can't be anything else going on. So it's a different world. This world moves like lightning speed now. Every day there's a new use, a new possibility that comes down the line. Things we wouldn't have thought about a year ago. AI, all this stuff didn't exist even a year ago to the extent it does today. Uses are going to be flying that were never there before. We can't sit here tonight and say, there's no other use for this. Who knows? Put it back on the market.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Let's move along to the next point.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you. Good point. So I could go on a long time about it's contrary to the public interest. It is. It is contrary. The second one that needs to be addressed is the spirit of the ordinance is not observed. The RO district emphasizes low-impact recreational use that are inherently compatible with residential areas. Introducing a principal business use contradicts the intent. Even if offices are located central on that property, it still contradicts the process. So while the ordinance allows for low-impact recreational uses and the separate, it shifts it from public enjoyment to private operational concerns. The idea that it's minor, well, it ignores that it's a different area. The idea of the buffering makes it doesn't. The zoning ordinance, if I read it right, doesn't say, well, this applies if it's flat, but it doesn't apply if it's hilly. It isn't relevant, if I may go on. The idea is to promote low-impact uses of the property, given the current zoning, and I think that goes away from it. The third point out of the 5 that's needed, substantial justice is not achieved. I would say there's some legal ease that I won't bother to go into, but we haven't been able to pin the Scots down as to what the limit is. They've alluded to 4 to 6 events. They've alluded to, well, we might do this. We don't have a set limit here. So how can we make a decision about what this is going to be when it hasn't been locked up? Number 4, the value of the surrounding properties are diminished. In my opinion, I'm never going to be able to sell my house for what I could sell it now if this turns into anything like they're proposing. If I have 600 attendees marching back across my backyard, it's got to take the impact away. The BC Underwood Group, fine organization, they failed to mention any impact from the evening events. Although it's mentioned in everything the Scots have submitted, BC Underwood didn't take into account that 4 to 6 nights a year, they've got 600 people marching past my house. That's got to have an impact, if I may. The last point, literal enforcement of the ordinance would not result in unnecessary hardship. Well, one of the things, if I understand it correctly in the zoning, is there's no, you can't say it's a hardship because they didn't get $1 million. There's not a fixed cost. If they put that in the market and held an auction, for instance, and at some point it would sell for some price, well, it would sell. So we can't say that it's a hardship because they didn't get $1 million. We don't know. I mean, we don't know what the price is, and how can we say that that's a hardship to them? That is, so after fumbling through this, I want to say, honestly, it doesn't match any of the 5 items that are needed. It doesn't match one of them, much less 5 of them. And I would really honestly urge and ask you to please reject this variance.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to be heard in opposition to this appeal?
Did you sign in?
He did. He signed in when he arrived earlier.
Swear to tell the truth and nothing but.
I do. My name is Liam Lafreni. I am a direct abutter to the property, having lived in my home for over 36 years. And before I begin my testimony, I just want to personally thank you all for your contributions and efforts on behalf of the community. I, perhaps more than most, understand the challenges and that come with your roles and the difficulties that come with being in the position of having to make decisions where not everyone is going to be happy with the outcome. I have enjoyed a long career as a professional planner, responsible for development and administration of zoning and planning regulations. I'm a member of the American Planning Association and achieved American Certified Planners certification. I also served on the State of Concord Planning Board for approximately 20 years, 10 of which were as chair. As a result, I'm sure it comes as no surprise that I'm pretty heavily invested in the concept of good planning practices and land use regulations that protect the quality of life issues for a community. I would also note that I served on the Concord Board of Directors for Child and Family Services during the design, development, fundraising, and construction of the cancer development facilities as they exist there today. With regard to the case before you this evening, the applicant suggests that the variances requested are minor in nature and should be considered as ancillary to other uses of the property. He makes the case that the corporate office's headquarters use is a very minor component of the overall use of the property. This argument ignores the fact that the proposed uses of the property, both in general and specific, are inconsistent with the zoning ordinance and the master plan. Perhaps most importantly, these uses are incompatible with the city's lowest density single-family zoning district. The applicant's agent attempts to equate the off-site impacts of an 8-week per year summer camp for a maximum of 125 children that through agreement with the neighbors did not employ the use of amplified music or loudspeakers to a corporate office and major event center with a liquor license hosting 600 plus attendees. This hardly can be considered to be comparable to the previous use, nor can it be considered low impact. Potential impacts of zoning variances that permit the intrusion of commercial uses into a residential neighborhood outside the urban growth boundary should not be understated. While integration of mixed-use development is a responsible approach to urban high-density walkable areas where municipal utilities exist, it's not appropriate from the rural environment far from transportation and utility infrastructure. The board is very aware, I realize, of the responsibility and the criteria required to grant a variance. So I don't in any way mean to suggest that you are not. However, my review of the proposal reveals to me that the 5-part criteria is not well met. Under the hardship question, to grant this request, the board must find that such special circumstances exist that the ordinance imposes an unnecessary hardship through a literal enforcement of the regulation. The provisions of this ordinance must be found to interfere with a reasonable use of the property, and that there is no fair and substantial relationship between the general provisions of the ordinance and the specific provisions affecting the property and the variance, and that the variance will not injure the rights of others. In this case, there's no demonstrable hardship unique to the property that justifies relief from the provisions of the ordinance. There are no special conditions that distinguish it from other properties in the area. The makeup of the property from the standpoint of soil types, configuration, and area is such that it could be utilized in a manner consistent with the ordinance. A direct relationship exists between the general purposes of the ordinance and the specific provisions affecting the property. The ordinance specifically states the RO zoning district is established to accommodate single-family detached dwellings and cluster developments, as well as agricultural, forestry, and low-impact outdoor recreation uses. Each of these anticipated uses could be accommodated on the site under the current regulatory structure. Even assuming that the applicant could demonstrate that special conditions exist that distinguish the property from others in the area, they must also show that there is no fair and substantial relationship between the purpose of the zoning ordinance requirements and the specific application of those requirements to the property. The applicant has not demonstrated how the ordinance is not fair in its restrictions of the against commercial uses in the residential open space district. It is true that the property is a large lot with a very irregular shape. In fact, that irregular shape is precisely the reason that the proposed use has the potential to exacerbate the off-site impacts of the commercial uses of the property, including that of a large-scale event center. There are more direct abutters in the single-family neighborhood than otherwise might be impacted were the parcel more concise and the uses were centrally located. The fact that the site considerations place those uses so close to many of the neighbors contributes to the potential for negative off-site impact. The applicant's agent suggests that hardship exists due to the length of time the property has been offered for sale. Most real estate professionals would agree that in a market such as we've experienced over the last several years, that price is the primary, if not only, reason for a property not to sell. If the property is offered for a price that doesn't reflect market value, it will likely not sell. In this case, market value would have to reflect the deterioration through neglect that the property has suffered. Quality of life and the expectation that land use regulations will serve to protect it are rights that would certainly be injured should the proposed utilization come to pass. The relief sought must also be the minimum necessary to result in reasonable use of the property. In this case, the relief sought cannot be considered as the minimum required to enjoy reasonable use, as the property has not been shown to be unsuitable for allowed uses. In fact, the applicant states that the uses requiring variances will facilitate development of a major event center, bringing with it impacts which depart significantly from the uses intended to be allowed in the district. The variance shall also be found not to be contrary to the public interest. The introduction of commercial uses into the rural open space district clearly cannot be deemed to be consistent with a property located in a residential zoning district outside of the urban growth boundary. The spirit of the ordinance shall be observed. The spirit of the ordinance in this case is clear. The RO zone is intended as a single-family residential area. It is so designated due to its location removed from the city center and because of the lack of municipal infrastructure. And finally, the no diminution value of surrounding properties, well, it remains unclear as to the impact of surrounding properties if New Hampshire Scott were to take occupancy. New Hampshire Scott has stated that weekly bagpipe and drum practices will take place in addition to events with amplified voices and music. Regardless of the quality of life issues that their utilization may have on existing neighbors, disclosure of this utilization to prospective purchasers may indeed impact future sales. In conclusion, I know you've been waiting for that. This matter is not a question of if New Hampshire Scott is a good organization or not. In fact, I'm sure that its staff and membership are all good and well-intentioned people. It is also not a matter of neighborhood support or not. Opinions will always differ based on perspective. At the end of the day, though, it is simply a matter of does the proposed utilization of the property satisfy the criteria set forth in each of the requisite findings required of the board to grant a variance. I would submit that they do not for the previous stated reasons. Perhaps the most compelling of which being the lack of hardship unique to the property. There's no question that the property could be utilized in a manner consistent with the master plan and the requirements of the ordinance. Parcel is not unique from many other parcels in the RO zone. Even excluding the areas restricted by wetlands and steep slopes, significant portions of the site that are suitable for allowed uses. It is my opinion, both as an abutter and a planning and zoning administration professional, that the board should deny the request based on the failure to meet all 5 criteria fully set forth in the zoning ordinance that are required for granting a variance. If the board were to disagree with my analysis and deem that a variance is appropriate, I would respectfully request that at a minimum, any approval be conditioned to require strict compliance with the City of Concord noise ordinance. I view that as one of the major impacts off-site that could have impacts on the quality of life issues. I thank you all for your time and for the opportunity to speak to you. I'm happy to answer any questions and conclude with that.
Any questions from the board?
I would just, we don't have the map anymore, but I would ask where you're the butter.
Sure.
If you could just show us up here.
What's your address?
141 River Road.
Leon, did you write your name in on the sign-in sheet?
I did.
Okay, thank you.
What's happening?
There we are.
Map to show where you are.
So would you like me to go up or cursor?
Either way.
You can go up there, that's probably easier.
I realize I'm not on the mic, but this would be my parcel right here.
Do you happen to know, is Mr. Smith also on River Road?
Mr. Smith is here.
All right, thanks.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to be heard in opposition to this appeal? We do have some written correspondence. The first was a letter from Mr. Smith. He covered the high points in that, so I will we'll file that in the record if anyone wants to read all of it, but he got through, I think, most of the major issues that he raised. The other communications we have a communication from Kate York, who, she identifies where she lives, because we have 2 pieces from her, I think. Anyway, she is in favor of the appeal.
It's
Correct.
Right there, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a letter from Jessica Martin, the Executive Director of In-Town Concord, praising N.H. Scott and supporting the appeal. We have a letter from the Vice President of Marketing of Loon Mountain, who are the hosts for N.H. Scott's Island Games, also in support of the appeal and praising their management of their events. We have an email from Wendy Skinner, who is also, I believe, in favor of the appeal. She is. And does she say where she lives? I don't think so. We have a letter from Ann Custer in favor of the appeal and praising N.H. Scott. And we have a letter from Ray and Cinda DeMonte, who are also in support of the appeal and are, again, supporters of N.H. Scott's desire to pursue their activities on the site. Any comments from code enforcement?
Not for me.
None at this time.
Mr. Arnold, would you like to offer any factual clarification in response to what you've heard?
Thank you. I'll be very brief. A couple of points on, I guess, some of the comments that were raised on the hardship criteria. And one of the comments related to the absence of public utilities, water and sewer. I would argue that that goes towards the hardship here. Without water and sewer out there, house lots have to be larger to accommodate those, and it further reduces how many lots and how many houses could be put on the property, as opposed to if water and sewer were out there and you could have a denser development. There were, as I mentioned, residential housing developers who looked at this property and backed away because the number of units wouldn't make the development viable. The other thing about hardship is the existing buildings, which I mentioned. They're not easily repurposed to any permitted uses out there. The nice thing about this proposal is that the existing main lodge building can be repurposed, and most any other permitted use out there would require kind of a complete demolition and loss of those buildings. In terms of the again, going towards the hardship, but I think also the public interest, if you look at the other permitted uses out there in the RO district, they're very limited. It's mostly single-family residential, agricultural uses. But one of the permitted uses is a publicly owned indoor and outdoor recreational facility. And if you consider that as a use that would be permitted out there, if there was a public body who wanted to operate something out there, which there isn't, I think the impacts of something like that would be arguably very similar, even greater, to what's being proposed here. And I guess to clarify just a couple of kind of the comments and concerns about noise, outdoor events, and so on. Again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the ask for you this evening deals with the indoor use, and NH Scott will obviously comply with noise ordinances. It wants to be a good neighbor. It's had several neighborhood meetings, as you can tell from the letters of support. But the outdoor use, I think, is the source of concerns about noise, crowds, et cetera, and that's an issue that the planning board is going to need to look at when we're asking them to approve the outdoor recreational use.
A question on that point,
Yep.
and I appreciate that this is difficult to classify by everyone, but while we're not ruling on the outdoor use, we are ruling on the two uses. So doesn't that kind of bleed over into reviewing the nature of the outdoor use?
I mean, from my position, it doesn't, because the two uses are only allowed if the planning board grants a conditional use permit for the outdoor recreational use. So the variance request for two principal uses on the same lot doesn't really matter what those two principal uses are, as much as it matters that you're going to allow two on the same lot. And the variance granting two principal uses on the same lot is meaningless if the planning board decides it's not going to grant a conditional use permit for the outdoor recreational use. The variance then doesn't come into effect because that use isn't allowed.
So you agree with that, right? Is it? Yeah.
Correct.
And so the planning board presumably is going to look at number of people,
Noise,
trash,
traffic,
noise, and all
all
traffic.
the stuff that I think is generating most of the concern with the project.
Now, are you saying, so all of the outdoor recreational activity that might take place is all going to be dealt with at planning? But I thought I heard tonight that there might be some small-scale classes.
Indoor?
Yeah.
So is everything that's before us tonight is only going to take place indoors? You won't have outdoor fly fishing classes, you won't have outdoor bag marching, everything?
We probably will, but
Okay.
that's all going to be subject to the conditional use permit asked from the planning board. All we're asking for from you tonight is to approve the use of the main lodge building for NH Scott's corporate offices.
In none of the educational classes or that were discussed tonight, even on the smaller scale, so.
The indoor, there will be indoor classes, but the city has classified the use as an office, a corporate office use. That's the principal use. When you have a principal use that's approved, as a matter of law, any accessory uses to that are also allowed. So you don't need to look, I mean, you're welcome to, you don't need to look legally so much at what the classes are and the seminars are for the indoor use. The way the city has classified this is to say that the indoor use is a corporate office use. So if you approve that, any uses that are accessory to it are also allowed. The determination has said that the classes that we're talking about, the on ours, the indoor events, that those are all accessory to the office use.
So,
Does that make sense or not?
Yeah, I'm just trying to be as clear as I can possibly be that, understand as clear as I can that the accessory uses that would be part of tonight's approval would only include indoor activity.
Absolutely.
There would be no accessory outdoor.
Correct.
And by granting, if you granted approval tonight, it would have nothing to do that could still get denied at planning. That's,
No, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, thanks. I understand that we're not dealing with the 600 people events, but I am worried about 25 bagpipes outside, right? So,
you don't,
One would be sufficient.
they don't play bagpipes inside, do they? Is that a thing?
The band all practices inside, yes.
So, bagpipes are pretty loud, right?
But it's inside.
It's inside.
And you can see it's wooded around that area, so.
So, I mean, a bagpipe being played inside, because I don't think you can play bagpipes very soft, right? I mean, to practice it, I mean,
We do it now at our building. and
does it, oh, you do? On Triangle Drive?
Lessons at 25 Triangle Park Drive right now.
So
and
can
there
it
are
be
no
heard?
issues.
So it can't be heard from the street?
No.
Or not very loud?
I mean,
Okay.
maybe if you're standing outside the window, you can hear it, but you're not gonna hear it in the parking lot, which is right nearby.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions for Mr. Arnold? Thank you. Thank you. With that, we'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed. We have a request for two variances in this case. One is to allow two principal uses on the same lot, and the other is to allow a use not permitted in this zone, which is the services / personal and business in the RO district. I'm going to start with you, Mark. What do you think?
I'd be inclined to grant it. I would reiterate, as they just did, that the potentially higher impact is caused by the use that is already allowed by conditional use permit. It seems like in total a comparable, if not even lesser intensity than the previous use. They've done their homework on the appraisal side for the impact of the surrounding properties. And I do see the hardship in the shape of the lot, the characteristics of the lot, and the difficulty that other interested parties have had in developing a lot. So I'm imagining we can't really do anything about the number of staff they have. I know that was a concern.
Mr. Winters?
Yeah, I agree. I do think it's sad that Camp Spalding had to close. Yeah, I heard a lot of good things about it, and so that was unfortunate. But it goes to the unique element of the lot. Now, if to the point one of the opponents made, I mean, if a developer came in here and had a plan to put subdivide this into 25 houses, I mean, I think we would look at that, I don't want to say favorably, but, we would give that a very fair hearing, because it is true that this is an RO district and Concord really needs housing badly, and if that could be done, but I don't hear anything to contradict that developers have looked at it due to the topography and the other factors. That's not really viable. I mean, to put one house on a lot like this and then demolish all these outbuildings, that doesn't seem like a very functional use of this particular lot. So I think what NH Scott is proposing here, I'm not sure economically why they really want this lot in particular, but I guess that's their business. The issues with the noise and all the outdoor uses, I can understand that the butters are going to have a lot of concern about that, but we're not really ruling on that. That all has to go through the planning board to decide how they're going to look at the noise and what sort of mitigating factors can come into play to reduce that impact.
Very good. What do you think? Mr.
I
Monahan?
think looking narrow, what's in front of us, kind of the narrow decision about just the use of the office space and some accessory indoor activity. I can appreciate what my colleagues have said about that. I just understand the lens we're all looking through the sewers, 600 people, but that's not in front of us right now, so I think it's a little easier to look at the narrow issue.
Mr. Waller?
I agree. Certainly, I don't see much of a difference in impact in the community. I don't see any devaluation of surrounding property values. We heard evidence that they really couldn't get reasonable use with other choices. We've had two major attempts to consider other uses of that property, and that never materialized. So I think therein lies the hardship. So I'm persuaded to support the two requests.
I agree with my colleagues for the reasons that they gave. Would anyone care to make a motion? And the motion ought to be pretty airtight.
Yeah,
This is a rather anomalous situation. We're not normally asked to.
and there is, for all the motions, I've did language that is city attorney friendly.
We always want that.
So it's in the staff memo, the last page.
You know where that is, Andrew. If you would care to use it.
The one from Mr. Hall.
Yep.
Yeah. Just bear with me 1 second.
Potential motion to grant is where it started.
Wait, hold on 1 second. I think I'm looking at the wrong document. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong document.
It's their original memo.
Oh,
The city's,
oh, I think I'm looking at the supplemental one.
yeah. Starts here and continues with various options.
Okay.
Got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, I would move to approve both of the variances and adopting the applicant's findings to allow findings of fact to grant the variances to allow services, personal business use that would not otherwise be permitted in this zone. And the findings of fact to grant the variance from section 28-24H to multiple principal uses on a single lot to allow multiple principal uses on the same lot where only one principal use is permitted. And I think that all of the criteria have been met for the reasons that we stated in the discussion we just had.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The motion carries. That brings us to item 4.2 in the agenda. Hebert and Boulder, on behalf of Christopher McAllister, requests approvals for variances from section 2852 duplex or two-family dwelling to allow a duplex to be established on property that has 120 feet of frontage where 150 feet of frontage is required, and section 2841H, table of dimensional regulations to allow maintaining the existing side setback of 10 feet 9 inches where a side setback of 15 feet is required at tax map lot 634Z76, addressed at 13 Dover Street in the medium-density residential RM district.
Am I passing the torch to Ms. Perkins as the alternate? Okay.
That's all right with both of you?
Yes.
Ms. Dolder, do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but?
I do.
When it comes,
My client is just signing.
okay, when it comes time to testify, please identify yourselves for the record.
Chris McAllister.
Good evening, Mr. McAllister.
Good evening.
So for the record, my name is Maria Dolder. I'm the attorney for the project, and as you just stated, this is my client, Christopher McAllister. He owns the property. This property is located at 13 Dover Street. It's located in your RM medium density residential district. And this is an older neighborhood, so it's a very densely populated residential neighborhood. According to your city assessor's records, this house was constructed back in 1964. The property has been the applicant's family home for the past 43 years. And although he moved away for some portion of that, he did move back into the home approximately 18 years ago to take care of his mom. So his mom continued to live at this property. Unfortunately, she did pass away in November of 2021. Now, since that time, the applicant has been tied up in probate for this particular property because this was part of his mother's estate. It took him approximately 3 years to get through the probate so that the property could be transferred into his name. And at the same time, he's been undergoing cancer treatments for like this past year. So it's been a lot that's sort of come on to him at the same point in time. Earlier, he was granted a special exception from this board to put an ADU in the property. However, after everything that's gone on, the ADU just isn't large enough to bring in enough income to allow him to stay on the property. You know, he has all of his legal costs from the probate fight, along with his medical treatments. He's had to put an extra mortgage on the property. So at this point in time, he really does need some additional income so that he can stay in his old family home. So we are requesting, instead of the ADU, that he be allowed to convert this home into a two-family so that he can remain on the property. As you can see by the tax map, this neighborhood is characterized by small lots and they're closely located homes. Like I said, this is an older neighborhood and that's how they were developed at that point in time. A number of these lots failed to meet either the size or the frontage requirements or both. And many of them are significantly deficient in both of those areas, and the majority of them do have some portion of their house built within your setbacks. This particular lot is one of the larger lots with significantly more frontage than the other lots, as you can probably tell by the map. There's one neighbor in the neighborhood that has sort of a like the same size property, and that's the abutter, and they've already got a permitted two-family on that particular lot. And it was permitted by variance by this board. So two families are permitted by right in this zoning district. So the use itself is anticipated in this area and it is permitted. Under the terms of your zoning ordinance, in order to establish a two-family on a property, you need to have both acreage and frontage that is 1.5 times your requirements. And so in this case, the applicant exceeds the acreage requirement because, like I said, this happens to be one of the larger lots in this neighborhood. So you require 18,750. He has 21,780. So he clearly meets your acreage requirement. It's the frontage where we have a little bit of an issue. So he has 120 feet of frontage, which is pretty significant for this neighborhood, but you would require 150 for this particular use. So the applicant is proposing that each of these dwelling units have approximately 1,200 square feet. So it's not going to be, you know, huge housing for 2 units, but it's going to be relatively modest. They will each have 2 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, a kitchen, and a living room. Now, in order to accomplish this, there is a second garage that currently exists on the property. And what we're proposing to do is to take down that second garage and then put up a basically a 2-story living area in its place. The problem that we are encountering is because of when all of this was built, that existing garage structure is located 10 feet 9 inches away from the boundary line, so almost 11 feet. It is grandfathered at this point in time. Your side setback is 15 feet. So when we tear down the garage and then we put up the new structure, we now need to meet the setbacks. So as part of this proposal, we are requesting that we be allowed to continue to maintain that setback that we have today. Do you have any basic questions before I start going through?
Nope.
Is the garage, you say a second garage, is I only...
Yeah, so it's all attached. It's all attached to the building.
Why don't you
Here.
advance the film here? There's a
This
picture, as
would
I
be-
recall, it pretty clearly explains that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But what, What's that on the map?
Where
that
is it? on there?
Larger
Sorry.
gray structure.
I'll start playing around with you.
It's not, it's a pool,
Oh, that's a pool, okay.
yeah, behind the house,
Got it.
right?
Just don't know where it's located on the house. No.
On the overhead picture, I think it's a pool.
Right.
This is what exists now is two separate one-car garages.
Gotcha.
They want to take this one, turn it into this.
So it's not so much you're taking the garage, you're removing a bay, a garage bay, is that?
Yeah, I mean, so
Potentially.
that second garage though wasn't built at the same time as the house.
Okay, but
So-
it's attached.
It is attached, absolutely. It's not, there's no detached.
So you're using the same footprint, basically, but just
Correct.
going up.
Oh, it's a pool. I was just looking at that pool. What's the pool?
All right, so,
Coming forward too, but it's going up.
so see that section that comes off of the house where it looks like,
You can go over there.
can I?
Do you have this in?
Yeah.
It's this. So it is attached. This is the part of the property that is in the setback. So we're proposing to tear this portion down and put a two-story there, but we want to maintain the same setback.
So they're maintaining one wall and the concrete floor of that garage? They're just tearing down the rest of it?
I'll let Chris speak to that, but I'm not sure how well that was constructed.
Oh, okay.
I'm not positive it may involve a foundation.
Okay, yeah.
It's really tricky to, insulate the outside edge of an existing foundation to meet code and to insulate underneath the slab, so, it's possible that I would want to do a new foundation.
Are you gonna be your own contractor?
Yeah, I am, that's what I do.
So that's what it's proposed to be. So that's the before, that's what we're proposing after. So it'll go up 2 stories. It may come out a little bit further, but we're still looking to just maintain. We're not gonna go further into the setback.
The door on the left-hand side of the street facade, that would be the entrance to the new unit?
Say that again?
That door,
Yeah?
is that gonna be the entrance to the new unit?
This door here would be the entrance to the new unit?
Yes, correct.
We're gonna have to get the chair an official laser pointer here. This place is just not gonna function.
Is it, the ADU doesn't work income-wise because the size isn't enough, is that it? Or is it because you wanna have potentially two renters and no owner occupancy?
It's the size just isn't enough. I'm limited to under 750 feet, and, it's just restricted in size, and this allows me to have a really nice 2-bedroom, bath and a half, really marketable place.
But to answer your question, it is intended to be owner occupied at this point in time.
At this
point,
Chris is intending on occupying.
Yeah, that's my whole point. I don't want to move. I've been there 43 years. That's been my anchor for 43 years.
Very good. Ms. Dolder, please proceed.
Okay, so first, that the variance will not be contrary to the public interest. Well, as you know, in order to be contrary to the public interest, it has to violate your ordinance's basic zoning objectives. To ascertain whether or not that would happen, we look at whether or not this would alter the essential characteristics of the neighborhood or if it would threaten the public health, safety, or welfare. The variances that we're asking for tonight do neither of those. As I've already stated, the ultimate use of the property is permitted by right in this zoning district. It is consistent with the general area, and we feel that it is consistent with the intent of your zoning ordinance. So this, allowing this to happen is not going to alter the essential characteristics of this particular neighborhood. And it will not have any adverse impact on the neighborhood or create any hazards. In addition, there is a lack of affordable housing available within the city of Concord. We heard that during the last presentation. Granting this a variance will not only allow the applicant to remain in his home, but it will establish at least one additional dwelling unit, and it should be relatively, affordable. It's going to be a 2-bedroom. It's going to be in an existing neighborhood. So we do believe that this would actually benefit the public interest in allowing Mr. McAllister to not only stay in his house, but to also have one additional unit in the city. And quite frankly, given his medical, emotional, and his financial situation, it's unclear to him as to where he would be able to afford to move at this point in time if he had to leave his home. So he is looking to stay at this location as he stated. Granting the variance will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the ordinance. So, once again, your zoning ordinance allows this use itself by right. So even though the property itself doesn't meet the requirement for 1.5 times the frontage, it does greatly exceed the majority of the houses in the neighborhood. And the majority of the houses in the neighborhood don't even meet your frontage requirement for an existing single-family dwelling. And I realize that it's all non-conforming and they're all grandfathered, but the fact of the matter is, this neighborhood was built quite a long time ago, so many of the lots in this neighborhood are non-conforming for what exists today. As I stated, that second garage, it was constructed sometime in the 70s, so not too long after the house, but a little bit after it. And so it's been in existence for at least 50 years or so, and we are not aware of any issues with the location of that driveway in the setback, that garage in the setback, and so we do not believe that this would have any issue. Even with the relief that we're requesting, the design will be consistent, as you can see with what exists today. It will fit in with the general neighborhood. So generally speaking, when we talk about frontage requirements, so that's the part of the zoning ordinance, generally frontage requirements are to make sure that the use that's being put on a lot can be supported, right? And it's not going to interfere with your neighbors or cause an unreasonable use. In this particular case, the driveway is already much larger than your standard average driveway. This driveway is 29 by 90. And so and that's already existing, it's paved, as you can see. So it's a really large driveway that currently exists. So there's no reason to think that even with the difference in the frontage, that this couldn't support an additional family, so to speak. So we believe that that could comfortably accommodate parking, ingress, and egress for an additional dwelling unit. Same thing with the side setback. We're just looking to maintain what exists today in terms of space. We do not believe that that was contrary to the spirit and intent of your zoning ordinance. Substantial justice. As you know, the standard for substantial justice is any loss to the individual that's not outweighed by gain to the public is considered an injustice. So in this particular case, we don't see any gain to the public by preventing this from going forward. But clearly, if the city were to deny it, it would be a tremendous loss to the applicant. Given that this is in keeping with the neighborhood, so the house that you can see in this particular picture is not a two-family, but the house on the other side of them is a two-family. They have the same amount of frontage as this particular lot.
I was gonna ask that.
And so I think these are the two largest lots in the neighborhood. It's this one and the abutter. And they have the same amount of frontage. They both have 120 feet, give or take. And so we think that this would be, obviously similar to that, and it would be substantial justice. Also, given the fact that we are going to provide one additional living unit, and so we don't have to look for, a vacant lot or something like that. This pre-exists. It's pretty easy for Chris to be able to turn this into an additional dwelling unit. It's not going to create any noticeable change to the area. So we actually see this as a gain to the general public in terms of providing even just one additional housing unit. Substantial justice is also achieved when you can grant variances that don't adversely impact on nearby property owners and allow the property to be used reasonably. Once again, the difference that's required under your zoning ordinance, and that will be provided, will not create any adverse effect on the adjoining neighborhood. At this point in time, we already encroach next to that particular neighbor. It's a little more than 4 feet. And it's my understanding that the neighbors that are most impacted by that are here this evening, and they do support this proposal. These properties have obviously existed for such a long time, and neither have had an issue with where that line, so to speak, lies. In fact, the neighbor is closer to the property line than this is at this point in time, and that has existed without any issue on either side. So we're just looking to continue that.
Questions for Ms. Dolder or Mr. McAllister?
Well, I still have more to go.
Oh.
Chris, I've only gone through 3. I mean, if you just want to go, I'll go. I know I talk a lot,
You
but...
finished doing your job.
4, surrounding properties. We do not believe that this would diminish any of the value of the surrounding properties. Clearly, it's going to still remain residential. We do believe that it's being designed well. It's going to be aesthetically pleasing. It's going to fit into the neighborhood. And once again, there's no evidence that the abutting property that was converted into a 2-family, that was done back in 2017, there's no evidence to show that that has caused any decrease in value to the neighborhood, so we don't believe that this should either. And then unnecessary hardship. So once again, as I've already stated, this is a permitted use in this particular district. It has we believe it has sufficient frontage for this particular use. Even though it falls short of what is required under your zoning ordinance, we do believe that it fits. We do believe that the setbacks already exist, so there would be no fair and reasonable rationale for denying that setback to remain, just in a different fashion. Once again, as I indicated, I do believe that the neighbors are here to support this, so they don't see an issue with that setback issue remaining as it sits. And then finally, the zoning restriction as applied to the property interferes with the reasonable use of it. We do believe that this is a reasonable proposal for this particular property. We believe that it's consistent with the neighborhood, and it will allow a long-time resident to stay in their home. Like I said, it's an older, well-established neighborhood. It's very densely situated. This just happens to be unique because it's one of the 2 largest lots in this development, and they have the ability to do this at this point in time. So we are asking that you grant the 2 variances to allow the duplex to be established. And now I'll take any questions that you have.
I have a question. Besides your neighbor, is there anybody else who has a duplex on that street?
No.
Other questions? Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Yep, that's fine.
Either one.
Good evening.
Good evening. Swear to tell the truth.
Yes, I will.
May we have your name, please?
Robert Silva.
What would you like us to know, Mr. Silva?
Well, my wife and I reside on 11 Dover Street. We've been neighbors with Mr. McAllister for some time, since he was a youngster, in fact. And we have no objections to his proposal.
Very good.
Nice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please step forward.
Thank you.
Swear to tell the truth?
I do.
May we have your name, please?
You bet. My name is Jeff Lewis. I live at 17 Dover Street. I am on the other side, the west side. I think this is, hopefully I could just make this very easy for you folks. I'm here to support this as well. My house is the house that is the other duplex on the property. We were before the board back in 2017. I think it was this month in 2017, actually. When we were looking to do a similar thing, we had a duplex that the board approved our variance. We needed the lot frontage variance, and I think we successfully demonstrated to the board at that time that these lots, even though they don't have 1.5 times the lot frontage that this is the current minimum in the zoning ordinance, they do have 1.5 times the lot frontage of the average lot on the street. If you look at all the lots on the street, they're pretty much 80-foot minimum lot widths. which was the minimum at the time in the 60s when the subdivision went through. If you take a close look, you'll notice that there is no 15 Dover Street. It goes right from 13 to 17, and that's because my folks who bought our house in the 60s got together with their neighbors at 13 Dover Street, and they bought the lot that was in the middle, and they split it right down the middle, effectively creating 1.5 times the frontage of every other lot on that side of the street. So it's interesting that the zoning ordinance today identifies a requirement for a duplex to be 1.5 times the lot frontage, not 150 feet, 1.5 times the lot frontage, minimum lot frontage. The precedent on this street is 80-foot minimum frontage, so with 120 feet, you do have 1.5 times the minimum lot width of the houses of the lots on this street. So I think that very clearly meets the intent of the ordinance as it applies to this neighborhood, and that was what the board agreed with back in 2017 when they granted us our variance. So to me, that's clear precedent and should be a no-brainer for you folks today, I hope. Regarding the setback, I think the only concern I would have with the setback is the neighbors who are affected by that, which is the Silvas, who have just testified. There's definitely precedent in this neighborhood as well. Back in 2008, I believe it was, our neighbors across the street needed a variance for addition and a garage on their house that was in both setbacks, the rear and the side setback. There was tremendous support from the neighbors, all the neighbors there, no one in opposition to that. Same thing happened for us a few years ago, tremendous support in this neighborhood. Most of the houses there already encroach into the setback, so as was mentioned in the applicant's, in their proposal, there's encroachments in all the houses relative to the current setbacks out there. So there is precedent on this street for both of the variances that are being requested today. And I think there is another unique element to this street that people who live on this street really, there's only one way they leave, and that's, when Father Time forces it. My folks just finally had to leave in the spring of this year, so.
My uncle's at number 10.
Across the street, yeah. The average length of, stay here over 50 years for people who come to live here, so. And there's just been tremendous support from all the neighbors. I know it's not something that you're necessarily looking for in your decision-making, but I think it is unique to this neighborhood that this is the third variance request on the street that's had complete unanimous support from the neighbors on the street. So I'll leave you with that.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
I remember when you came before us back then, and you talked about how close-knit the neighborhood was, so it's good to see that continues.
Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who is in opposition to it? Any comments from code enforcement?
No comments.
With that, we'll close the public testimony portion of the hearing. We have a request to grant 2 variances, one for lot frontage and another for side yard setback, in order to expand an existing ADU into a full-fledged second unit by increasing the height of the existing footprint in the vicinity of the garage. I'm going to start this one, Mr. Wallner.
Thank you. Well, seeing as this is one of the 2 largest lots on the street, and seeing that what they're doing is basically going to use the existing footprint, and seeing that we've previously approved a very similar request, I'm inclined to approve it.
Very good. Mr. Monahan.
I agree with Mr. Wallner and have nothing to add.
Mr. Winters.
I agree. I just want to point out it's ironic that their parents got together and squeezed out a lot, and now their kids 40 years later paid us back by putting in 2. So.
That is kind of funny.
Ms. Perkins.
I don't see any reason to deny the variance.
I agree with my colleagues. Would anyone care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
And the details of the motion?
Yeah, I make a motion to grant the variances from section 28-5-2, duplex or 2-family dwelling, to allow a duplex to be established on property that has 120 feet of frontage or 150 feet of frontage is required because all the criteria under RSA 674-33 have been met based upon the record before us. I also make a motion to adopt the applicant's proposed findings as the board's findings of fact.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous, the motion carries. The second, yeah, Nick. That brings us to item 4.3 on the agenda this evening. Cleveland Waters and Bass, PA, on behalf of Bangor Savings Bank, requests approvals for variances from sections 2841D, minimum yard requirements, and H, table of dimensional requirements, to permit a structure, refuse container, and a loading area enclosure within 26 feet of the rear property line where a minimum distance of 30 feet is required, and within 5 feet of the side property line where a minimum distance of 25 feet is required, and section 28714D, setbacks for refuse containers loading areas, to permit a refuse container and loading area within 5 feet of the side property line where a minimum distance of 10 feet is required, at tax map lot 631Z5, addressed as 111 Loudon Road in the Gateway Performance District. Mr. Hastings, do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but? And you, sir?
Yes, David Latulip with CJ Developers representing Bangor Savings.
Thank you, gentlemen. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We're here tonight for Bangor Savings Bank, who own 111 Loudon Road. They acquired this property a few years ago. It had been formerly a physician's office, I believe, for a long time. It's sandwiched between the McDonald's to the east and the commercial condominium office condominium project to the west. It's a residential neighborhood to the rear of this property. As you know, Loudon Road is a busy commercial neighborhood. This is right in the heart of that. It's a relatively narrow lot, you can see from this map, compared to the lots to the east and the west in particular. It's narrow, sort of a parallelogram, if I'm remembering my high school geometry correctly, but that creates some site constraints because of that configuration. The bank intends to redevelop the site, take the existing building down that's been there for some time, and put in a new branch bank facility with a drive-through and code-compliant parking. Would also reduce the number of curb cuts from 2 to 1, so it would be an improvement over what is there now on Loudon Road. In designing the site, the applicant needs to accommodate a reasonable sized branch bank building. It's not huge. You've seen typical branch banks before. It's nothing outside the ordinary for this type of facility. It needs to accommodate the drive-through facilities. It needs to accommodate parking, including surface parking for customers who come into the bank, employees who are working at the bank, as well as stacking spaces as required by the ordinance for the drive-through. It also needs to accommodate refuse removal. Even though this is a bank, there is a need for a dumpster area. It will not be used very often. The primary waste product of this site will be paper. They will be removed probably once a week, probably at most, or on a regular basis. We need to provide that refuse facility in a safe, accessible, and convenient manner, particularly for the folks doing the removal. The trucks need to come in and be able to pick that up and navigate around the site. Anne Marie, can we forward to the concept plan here? Perfect.
Yes.
So you see how the site lays out. The parking needs to be to the side and to the rear. Again, to be code compliant, it needs to have, I believe, 19 spaces are required. So we're meeting those requirements. The setbacks, because of the shape of the lot, sort of drive the location of the building in a certain location. And the only, I shouldn't say the only, the best location for the dumpster is in the northeast corner. Would allow trucks to, front-loading trucks to drive into the site, pull up immediately to the refuse container, back up and circle the site very conveniently without interfering with the drive-through lanes, without interfering with any site traffic. The refuse container will be enclosed on a concrete pad as proposed it would be 26 feet from the rear property line. It would be 5 feet from the side property line. That's the side where McDonald's is located. The ordinance, this is inconsistent with the setback requirements of the ordinance, both the structure setback, which requires a 30-foot minimum setback from the rear sideline, and the specific requirements in the ordinance for refuse containers, which has a 10-foot from the property line requirement. So we're asking for variances from both of those requirements in this case. The application material addressed the variance criteria. I'll hit some of the highlights or lowlights, if you will. The proposed variance reflects a balance of a number of zoning considerations, not all of which are consistent with each other in this case. Due to the particular size and location of the property and the intended use, the location will not be visible. There'll be vegetative screening to the rear. It's, I believe, fenced or vegetative screening to the McDonald's parking lot. So it's in a probably the most obscure location in the site for the refuse container. The location, as I mentioned, will safely, conveniently result in the management of the solid waste with minimal or no impact on the neighbors, customers, or the operations of the bank. The location will not be out of character with the neighborhood. Again, this is a fairly densely populated commercial area. Having a refuse container in this particular location will not be out of place in any way, shape, or form. And without the variance, the applicant would either need to find a way to relocate the refuse container to somewhere else on the site. It's hard to imagine where that might be without taking up parking spots. You know, we could conceivably get a setback compliant refuse container location, but it would take up some of the necessary parking spots, so we'd probably be here for a variance for the parking if we did that. Or it wouldn't be convenient to get trucks in and out to service the refuse container. The other option is to not have a refuse container at all, keep the waste inside the building and administratively remove it periodically, which is can be done. It's not convenient. It's not the safest way of handling the waste, even though it is primarily paper. And we believe this is a much better alternative for the site and the proposed use. So for those reasons, we ask that you grant the two variances.
Questions?
You're tearing down a building. Is that existing pavement right now, the way it is?
Pretty close, just where the edge of the cars are, so you're still gonna have that big stand of trees behind it?
Because obviously you would need variances for all those, but that's existing pavement, so that sort of grandfathered in, is that it?
No, that's the dash line is the building setback line.
Right, but I'm talking about all the pavement and the around the building is already existing right now, and you're gonna maintain that.
It's
as
within the
is.
pavement setback.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
You don't need
that-
pavement setbacks.
We don't
it's
need
already
a
there.
pavement
Correct.
setback. Okay.
Your neighbor immediately, as we look at this plan to the right, is McDonald's?
Yes. And this is forward of, at the top, top of the screen is where their drive-through lane comes, so they even go further back. So.
Very good. Other questions from the board?
Do you think you, all those back parking spots, do you think you need them, are they likely to be used a lot, or are you putting them mainly to comply with the code?
Both, and because this is a separated, we can't beg, borrow, or steal if we're wrong, so that's about right. And what's a little different now with banks, before you used to have the big teller line, they have 1 or 2 pods, but in the back of the building is more office, so people come and go more often through there.
You mean
the back of the back of the branch, because they'll do the payroll services, the mortgages. So you have people who will be there they have a few more employees there.
Oh, and they would be the people parking in the back?
Yes, and the one along the side is for customers.
Got it.
So, and it works well.
Very good. Any other questions from the board? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The record will show that there was no one here to testify either in favor or in opposition. Any comments from code enforcement? No comments from code enforcement. With that, we'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed, and I'll ask Mr. Davey to.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. I see the hardship because of the unique shape of the lot, the safety concern with the waste vehicles moving in and out, and complying with the parking requirement.
Mr. Winters?
I agree.
Mr. Monahan?
Yeah, it's a logical design. I think the requests are reasonable.
And Mr. Wallner?
The same.
I agree with my colleagues. Would anyone care to make a motion?
I would move to grant the variances from sections 28-4-1D, minimum yard requirements, and the table of dimensional regulations to permit a structure, a refuse container, and loading area enclosure within 26 feet of the rear property line where a minimum distance of 30 feet is required, and within 5 feet of the side property line where a minimum distance of 25 feet is required, because all the criteria under RSA 674-33 have been met based on the record before us. And I also move to adopt the applicant's proposed findings as the board's findings of fact. And I also make a motion to grant the variance from 28-4-1H, table of dimensional regulations, to allow maintaining the existing side setback of 10 feet 9 inches where a side setback of 15 feet is required, because all the criteria under 674-33 have been met based on the record before us. Again, adopting the applicant's proposed findings as the board's findings of fact.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and
Both.
It's been moved, both motions have been moved and seconded. Any discussion on either? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The motion carries.
Thanks, guys.
You're welcome. Do I hear a motion to approve the findings of facts from last month?
Do we want to do Walmart?
The Walmart case.
Oh, I forgot all about them. The board, I guess we have a couple choices here. One, we could table the case because we have no one here to ask questions of, Walmart. Or we could act on the case. My recollection is to say outright that they are making no changes.
Yeah. It's identical.
Just
Did you have any contact from them? Were you expecting them here?
I was not. I don't think they thought they needed to be here. Just an extension. They addressed the 3 criteria in their application.
do they have counsel? Do they just, do they have a law firm working with them and they just,
No, it's
just the store manager?
Yeah.
Property manager?
I mean, I have to be honest, just looking at the criteria, I mean, I not to prejudge it, I don't really see why the same reasoning for the variance won't apply again, but at the same time, we're supposed to find that there is a delay beyond the applicant's control. I mean, their reasoning was that there was bad weather in January of 2023.
Well, they couldn't control the weather, now could they?
They didn't mention all the months thereafter. I mean, to me, that was a little thin. I wouldn't mind if one of them came and gave us something a little better than that.
I read that, I thought the same thing, but I also thought,
And
who the heck, why does it matter?
Exactly.
It's thin, but as someone who's waited 4 years for a sprinkler system to be finished in my house.
Yeah.
But why would
They
it,
might have a little more pull with some of
They
the
might.
construction industry.
why
If
would
I
it matter from
may,
the point of view of zoning, who controlled the
Yes.
decision?
Yeah.
As long as circumstances haven't changed.
If I may, I would point out that they, in their findings, they state that they are doing this because they're rolling it into a larger remodel program that's going on in 2026. But this extension
Well, yeah.
Right.
will end January 3rd or January 4th, 2026. So they're going to have to come back for another variance.
Well, there'll be a cold January.
It'll be cold January.
Cold January. They're waiting for climate change.
If I may,
Be doing anything.
Boy, that sign's gonna get pretty tatty.
so not knowing the, minus the date aside that the city planner was talking about, we have the building plans for their major renovation in my office now.
Okay.
I don't know how fast that's gonna get moved upon, but they gave us a very large plan set that said, we're doing a major renovation to the store. So I'm not saying that that's tied into this at all, but I just wanted to justify that we have that in our office.
Do you know if they're gonna have to come back before us for those renovations?
Oh, I doubt it. I think it's all internal
It's all
fit up,
Oh, okay, all right.
other than the sign, but I think it's all part of that package. And that's all I just wanted the board to know. I'm not, sorry.
So they get a 1-year extension, is that what they're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't mind doing that. I
It
just,
is,
No one's here to oppose it.
as long as we're confident, my own feeling is as long as we're confident that the circumstances haven't changed, that they're doing the same sign, same place, same signs, in the same place, we would have no reason not.
Do a motion to approve based on that?
Go for it.
I had a code enforcement question though.
probably
So
gonna vote.
can we only grant
I'm probably gonna
a
vote.
1-year
no, I just-
extension one time?
Yes.
So they can't come back a year from now and say,
You
No.
can vote whatever.
They would need to come back for a new variance.
so
If
maybe
they wanted to do something different than what
If
we
they want to do something different and/or if they don't get the signs installed by January 4th, 2026.
they have to come back for
They have
new
to come
variance
back.
anyway.
Yep.
maybe that should be, if we approve it, maybe that should be stated. They should be reminded of that. Can we do that? Ask you to do that?
You can, I mean, it would,
'Cause-
staff will, when they come in for their sign permits, will make sure that
They
it's
know,
the
okay.
exact same sign that was, signage that was approved as the variance.
and is
And if it's not,
They'll know that
we
it's not renewable after that.
it's not.
No, they have to
So as long
Is
as
it-
they know that, good.
is it
Yeah.
1 year from tonight or 1 year at the exhaustion?
It's
of
1
the-
year from the expiration date, which is January 4th, 2025, so that extends it to January 4th, 2026.
Ms. Perkins, did you want to make a motion?
Oh, why not? I'll make a motion that we approve this based on no changes to the permitted sign space.
Is there a second?
Maybe to be, what you're saying, just,
What would you
your
like?
motion was you will grant them a 1 year, a
1
one-time,
year,
1 year extension.
One-time, 1-year extension for the reasons stated.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
No.
The vote is 4-1. Mr. Winters in the minority.
They didn't meet the criteria.
Mr. Winters doesn't like their weather. Do we
So moved.
move for the minutes or the? Okay. Is there a second on the motion to approve the minutes?
A second.
Yeah, all in favor? Anyone opposed? And the findings of fact from last month?
So move it.
So the findings of, so the way the city attorney is having us do it now is, the findings of fact are in, because you're stating it in the motion that you're approving them, that goes directly into the minutes. They
Oh.
want the findings of fact to be part of the minutes, not two separate
Oh.
documents.
Oh,
So if you
good.
looked at the minutes, the findings of fact are they are verbatim in the minutes. That is the way they have directed us to do it.
Fine with me.
We are following direction.
Do I hear a motion to
I don't
adjourn?
think they've
So
lost the
moved.
case since I've been
Is there
on
a
the board.
second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I think.